Eyal was one of these kids. He had a voice that sounded like he smoked 6 packs of cigarettes a day, very raspy voice. In fact, when we would check out from a supermarket and someone would hear his voice, they thought it was an 85-year-old man. They said, this little kid. And he always had junk and it sounded like croup and respiratory infections, ear infections. And we were frequent visitors at the pediatrician's office. And the response that we kept getting was, he'll outgrow it, he'll outgrow it. And then he was about 4 years of age. I still recall the night. It was in March. And Eyal was sick, all kinds of junk in his chest. It's around 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. I took him to the bathroom, and his eyes were bulging. And I was talking to him, and he was unresponsive. And his knees were buckling. And I said to my wife, he's very, very sick. And we called the doctor, and he'll outgrow it. But we insisted to see the doctor that morning. And when the pediatric surgeon took one look at Eyal, he had him wheeled immediately into the intensive care unit at Upstate. And nobody knew what was wrong. This whole thing just played out so quickly. Within a couple of hours, he was intubated. He was put on a respirator. Nobody knew what was happening. And then they did a scan on a Saturday morning. And by accident, the scan went further down. And they discovered he had a brainstem tumor, which was an ugly, ugly tumor. Very deep-seated, where nobody would want to operate on that kind of tumor because it controls basically animal functions, heart rate, respiratory, real basic kind of stuff. At that point, they put him on steroids. He looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy. In a matter of days, he was just all pumped up. And they quickly were going to do a brain surgery, more to really to biopsy him. And they wanted to stay away from the brainstem as much as possible because they afraid they were going to do a lot of damage. And it was like a 12-hour surgery. And I remember he was in a ventilator. We knew how bad it was because the doctors had told us by that time. And at that point, we were told he was going to die within weeks, maybe just days. The kind of conversation, take him home and enjoy your time with him. And our family does not accept the word no. We don't believe in the word impossible. And what began then was an aggressive search to find someone who would plant some kind of hope for us, even if it's 1%. And we found a physician in New York City, at NYU, Dr. Fred Epstein, who said, bring him down. Now, in the middle of this whole thing, I'm a rabbi. I deal with hope and courage and prayer, and thank goodness we were expecting our 5th child in the middle of all of this. And the irony of the whole thing is that on one hand, my wife is carrying life. On the other hand, we're told that our oldest son is going to die. And these two conflicting emotions, it's like somebody just reaches into your heart and just does a real number on it. And he was operating at NYU. They took a large section of the tumor out. This was only the 8th time they've ever gone after that tumor. It was highly experimental. And a few days or a couple of weeks afterwards, because now they do things differently post-operatively, they have more experience with it. What happened is that he had a brainstem stroke where he was in a coma for months and months. It was just horrible. He came out in the end of October in 1986. The New York Mets were playing the Boston Red Sox in the World Series. And Eyal was always a big baseball fan. And it's around 2 o'clock in the morning. No, the game was probably at 10, 11 o'clock at night. And I'm reading something, and all of a sudden he has not responded in months, and he makes this strange sound like it's called a zerbert. And I look over, and I can't believe it. And the reason is they announced that coming to bat was Howard Johnson, who played third base for the Mets Eyal loved Howard Johnson because he had a friend in nursery school, Howard Johnson. And Eyal opens his eyes and he says, no words, but he articulates it. You know, the next inning, Mookie Wilson plays for the Mets, I think center field. He liked him as well because of his name, Mookie. And all of a sudden, Eyal goes, and he mouths. And he came out of his coma by watching the Mets-Red Sox game. But he came out of it incredibly physically challenged and compromised. One of maybe 10 or 12 kids like this in the United States. Intellectually intact, but nothing works. He's on a ventilator. His vocal cords are frozen. He cannot eat. He has a feeding tube because otherwise he'll aspirate. We brought him home on the eve of one of the holiest days in the Jewish calendar, Rosh Hashanah. And I'll never forget walking up Kimber Road where our synagogue is and standing on the pulpit and explaining to the congregation that day how special it really was for us. People thought we were crazy. How can we celebrate with a kid like this? And then what we had, we started setting little goals. Somebody said, what about him going back to school? I said, what, are you crazy again? Go to school? He went to Ed Smith. He skipped a couple grades and graduated really grade level. And then they said, of course, he'll go to junior high school, to Levy. Went to Levy. And then somebody said, what about high school? He went to Nottingham High School, was a member of the National Honor Society. And sometimes Nottingham could be a rough school, a real rough school. But I got to tell you, these kids, it was the best of community, how they looked out after him. And we had a choice to make. We could have kept him in high school to 21 years of age, but it wasn't fair to him because he was able to graduate when he was 18 years of age. And his graduation was at the War Memorial. I mean, it was Nottingham kids. I mean, they would open up their robes, they would flash the audience. And I'll never forget when they called Eyal up from his diploma. And every one of those kids, okay, on their own, stood up for probably 10 minutes and sustained applause. And in one hand, they were applauding Eyal's accomplishments. But I think on the other hand, what the applause was about possibility. That they probably said to themselves, if that kid could do it, then we could do it. We could do it. And then finally what happened is the next thing was that it wasn't if no longer. Okay, we used to start with if he'd be able to go to elementary school, if he'd go to middle school, if he'd go to high school. When he graduated high school, that was no longer an if. It's, okay, where are you going to go to college? And he was accepted to Syracuse University. So, this is where, where we are right now. So Eyal's graduation from college, it's not just the college graduation. And if it is, I mean, there are thousands of people who are graduating college. I mean, his graduation is about life. That's what it is. I think in terms of what I want to see is that I'd like to see miracles. Like to see him walk again. We have one tape of when he was little and when we were in Florida with my parents of his voice. Okay? That was the last time we heard him speak, when he was 4 years old. I'd love to hear his voice again. I'd like to hear him sing again. But, but we don't beat ourselves down with that. It's we don't look back, what it was, but what we do, however, we do remind him. Do you remember when he went to Nanny and Pa's and he ran around the table? And we'll still go back and we'll joke about it. Do you remember that? Do you remember when we had the house in the Poconos? Because I want him to remember there was a time in his life when we could hear his voice, when, we would have pillow fights, when he could swing a baseball, a golf club, play an accordion a little,